What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to create this cabin and this sort of misty scene. As always, you're going to want to go ahead and grab all the requirements from the link in the description down below. That takes you over to a post over on my Patreon. We can grab all of the requirements for today's design completely for free. And that is the palette, the canvas size, and the guide. That's it. That's all you're going to need for today's design. As always, when you're done, make sure to tag me in your finished creations. And also make sure to go ahead and check out my Patreon while you're over there, because that's where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters. And the catalogue sits at over 160 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording, and they're only available on Patreon. So make sure to check them out. And with all that said, let's get started. So as you can see on my canvas, I've added in my guide, just a very simple one. You can see there in the layers. If you go to your actions and go to add, you want to insert it from your photos or files, depending on where you saved it. And then of course, the only other thing I've done is tapped on the layer, tapped on rename and called it guide. Therefore, we can see it and distinguish it in our layers nice and easily. Now, as always, if I ever go too fast in these videos, tap on the video. You'll get a little menu pop up, and then tap in the top right on the settings cog and go to playback speed. You can slow me down to fit your pace perhaps a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and start working on our design there. Let's go ahead and set our background color. We want to set it to this color in the bottom right of the palette, and then hit the tick. Let's then create a new layer, drag it underneath our guide. Let's then go to our colors, and we want the middle of the far right column. Brush wants to be set to the option of, we want the Mountain Lilac brush, which is in Grunge, Mountain Lilac. And then you can set the size to something fairly large, like 88%, for example. Go along the bottom here. And this little sort of circle up here is the break in your trees. Look at how, though, if you layer it on top of itself, it does get a little bit darker, and we can use that to our advantage. So what we want you to do is kind of sort of bring it up towards here quite fast, layer it in like wiggles and layers of it. Probably bring it down to about the 50% marker, and then just in this gap here, you kind of want to leave a bit of a gap for some of the sunlight, the morning sunshine perhaps, to come through. But if you again do it all in like one motion and you keep going, you can kind of layer in like more layers of the forest quite easily. So we're going to do exactly that. Keep layering in the color, and the idea is to constantly try your best to draw like circular kind of rounded-ish shapes, so that you can sort of give the impression of some trees, of course, throughout the whole of this kind of background scene, which is just going to be forest land pretty much. Now we probably will set the brush size just a tad smaller to like 31%, and then just up here, just kind of again distinguish a little bit, and maybe just sort of dash a few little bits into that kind of space. I don't want it to be too bright. I want it to have a little bit of that color coming through. Then you can do it on the same layer, you can do it on separate layers, it's totally up to you. I'm going to go top right now with the palette. Going to go back to the 50% marker and repeat, except this time you don't go any closer to that kind of sunlight area than we did on the previous layer. So you kind of just work it in, you go a little bit kind of close towards the edge, you can get very close towards the edge, for example, of what we previously made. And then you can start to, circular motion, build up kind of like tree-like-ish shapes. And don't worry about the layering of color. There's going to be so many more colors to layer on top. Probably like a 30% now, just to try and get a little bit closer in there and just layer in, basically like repeating fluffy lines almost, to create that kind of tiered stacking of what will be tree. I'm just going to color that all in at the bottom. Super messy, because at the end of the day, what you end up sort of layering in here is just like additional kind of background layers. It will look really nice and effective. Then you want to go to your colors. We then move to this color here. It's the top of the second column from the right, and repeat. Again, so we bring it in, circular kind of motion, bring in some shapes. I've got a brush size of 35% still, and I'm just going to try to layer in more tiers to my woodland or layers. It could be woodland. Oh, that one's a bit too much of a line. I'll undo that one. There could be layers of like forest land. It could be layers of like actual hillside. Honestly, it doesn't really matter too much. I'm just going to tinker that all in there, get in pretty much into that horizon layer there in behind our house. So that's all starting to come together a little bit more. Let's then go to our colors again. We've then got the middle of the second column from the right. Now this one we want to focus a little bit closer. You'll be able to see on the guide this line here. So we are going to end up getting a little bit darker, but you kind of just want to get fairly close to it, a little bit beyond it. I'm going to go a bit smaller, about 29% now, just so I can start to be a tad more precise with my application. And then again, if you let go and then sort of draw in lots of patches, you can really almost like build out trees, etc. I'm going to go in behind our house there, just layering in some dark tone. Look how kind of easy and sort of straightforward we keep the idea of the background in here. Circular motions as always, just to tear it in, and you can go in front like of some of the further back elements. That's perfectly fine. Just as long as you give it kind of a bit more substance, you should be able to allow it to have like a little bit more sort of definition in a way. Now I know that looks crazy, but that is what we are going for. Then we're going to go to our colors again, bottom of the second column from the right, and now you're working just pretty much up to that line that I've positioned there in our little background there. Again, like tap and push a few times if you want to get some definition of some shapes. Maybe keep this one like a little bit smaller, a little bit lower perhaps. Maybe like a little something down here. Again, just patches and pushes. If you've done a lot of my recent tutorials, especially with all these new 5.4 brushes, you'll be very familiar with this kind of process. And if you enjoy the process, well, then there's more for you to do on the channel. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure to check out some of the latest tutorials. If you like this kind of aesthetic, definitely used these new brushes a lot recently in the more autumnal scenes that I've done recently. Now that's okay. I'm going to leave that a little bit as it is because we're going to move into some of the darker tones, and I want to do that on a separate layer in case I want to sort of adjust the levels of them a little bit more. So we are going to go ahead and create our house first and then create the colors. So let's create a new layer. Let's go to our colors. Now our house is actually going to be this color here. It's the top of the third column from the right. Let's just go to our brush and change it to the option of pens, and we're going to go to the Elphinstone. This marker is always set to 32%. You can see your house here on the guide. Just want you to draw in the basic outline of the house. That's all we're going to draw, and then drag and drop the color in, just so we've got that shape nicely full and taken care of in our scene. So it's on a separate layer. It won't get affected by the background and any application of color. If you can't see your guide, perhaps just like invert it, or otherwise like turn off your background for a minute if you need to. We've got the top of the chimney up here, just trying to make sure because it's pressure sensitive that I do a good job. I can drag and drop it into there because that's boxed in. And then let's go down the rear like so, come across and then down the back of the house. Now see I've got like a bit of a zigzag line. I want you just to kind of draw in like the lines somewhat correctly. So I've let go and then I'll draw in another one along there. That's fine. As long as they connect, you can drag and drop the color in, and your house is then situated in your scene. We can then go ahead and tap on the layer below, create another new layer, and then go to your colors, grab the top of, again, that third column from the right. It should already be that anyway, but it's recent. You want to go to right at the top now, go to Mountain Lilac, and then with that selected, probably that 25% brush size will look really nice. Let's then go ahead and just darken up quite a bit. We first of all want to kind of sort of get rid of this kind of illusion that the house is just sat like on its own, like close towards us. We want to kind of blend it into the rest of the environment now. So we have lots of sort of application of color. I'm going to try and curate some. I'm going to go a tad smaller. That's roughly now about 20%. I want to curate some kind of tree-like shapes here and embed our lovely little cabin in this woodland. Now again, I want it to be fairly dark over here, so this is going to be tap 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 in a way. So it's like tap and circular motion, tap and circular motion. And again, don't be afraid to go over that line a little bit if you want to, just to push out some details here and there. But ultimately, again, we want this back right corner over here nice and dark, so it really does sort of blend in with the rest of the scene. And then I can let go, and I can then maybe add like a bushish like shape here, definitely over here on the edge of our little horizon. Layer it in a few more times, and then just kind of darken that up, connect them kind of together. I'm going to set my brush size to about 30% because I'm going to just sort of bring in some dark tone here just for the floor. So just really fill that in. In fact, we'll go up to 88% and we will just layer in the ground over here, so it's all matching for a moment. So something like that. Don't worry about the very bottom of your scene, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to go back down to about 20% and then get, again, a bit more sort of purposeful with my application of color. You can go even smaller, like a 9%. Although if you want to get some needed perhaps detail, you can change your brush. If I go ahead and find you the Piceno brush, it's under Creative at the very bottom, the Piceno, and I always have it set to around about sort of 7% when it's a little bit further back. That's probably a little bit too small, in fact. Let's go to about 14. And this one you can kind of use, it's got a bit more of a scattered shape to it, so you can almost create like actual tree shapes here and there. And don't be afraid just to do like the odd little sort of dark little patch just a little bit higher. It's a nod towards something up there. Maybe again like here, just like a few little taps and pushes along. I'm imagining there's like a bit of a pathway here, which is what I'm going to try and allude to a little bit. And then just up here, let's maybe go to the 20% marker here. I'm just going to try and again curate that kind of overhanging tree kind of approach up here, but making sure that the over here on the right, again, super nice and dark. So just behind our little tree, behind our little cabin. There we go. So that's looking a little bit more defined. I'm quite happy with how that looks. Let's then move to the super foreground area. So we're going to go right to the top of our layers, but underneath our guide as always, and create a new layer. Go to your colors and go top left of the palette. And then you want to go back to your brush. In fact, we do want the Piceno brush. So if you're not using it already, Creative and Piceno. And let's set that size. I think 20% is probably fine. You can see this line down here at the bottom of our design. We're going to go all the way left to right at the very, very bottom. And then we're going to somewhat create like little kind of bush shapes pushing outwards. So pushing up to the edge of the shape. And then you can color in the main body. And then again, pushing up and out like so. Leave like gaps. Don't make it like a line. That'll be too repetitive otherwise. Have it kind of gradient down, and then maybe on this side there's a larger bush quite quickly here. So it kind of comes in, it really increases the scale, and then we sort of connect that to another one on the right there. So it's like down and then kind of gradient up. Not necessary, but totally up to you what you want to curate. At the end of the day, this is going to be sort of a backdrop in a way to what will be our foreground details and definition. Now we do need to draw in the ground as well. So let's go ahead then and go tap on our house and create a new layer. Let's go to our colors, and the ground is a mix of this column here. So we're going to first of all grab the bottom of the second column, and you want to be bearing in mind the light's going to come down a little bit, but it's mainly going to come across, of course, from our actual house. So you can turn your guide all the way down if you need to like 10 or 20%, and then you've got a much easier sort of sight of your screen. I'm going to go to about 14% on the brush size. With the Piceno, if you press really lightly, in fact, let's go 20 at the foreground. If you press really lightly and continue with your brush stroke, you'll get a lovely smudge. If you just want to do like streaks through, you'll get a lot more sort of definition. Now, we want to kind of focus our lighting over here on this left-hand side, because of course the light coming from the house would light up this area. Therefore, we obviously want this right-hand side to probably be a bit darker. Now, it's not to say we can't add any of this first color over here, but try to leave some of that dark tone coming through from underneath. And in fact, having said that, we need to go underneath again to this background layer and go to our colors. We want to grab this color here again, top of the third column, and then just get that dark tone in here right at the foreground area if we haven't already. Just making sure there's a good solid amount of that blue sitting underneath there. So again, that's top of the third column from the right. It's a little bit more blue if you haven't already got it. Then switch your color back again, to the bottom of the second column, and then go back up to your ground layer. Just making sure then you've got a good solid amount of blue at the foreground, and you can get your basis of your kind of ground in here. And again, you can send that a little bit further back if you imagine that there's like a little bit of a pathway or something, define what it looks like. Then go to your colors and move up. Let's move up to the middle of the second column. This is where we start to get a bit more definitive with our lighting, and we're just blending it on top, keeping the pressure nice and light, leaving dark divots in the ground to show like unevenness of the ground. And of course, we let that get really light as it gets closer towards us, because the light's all just going to start falling off. And then over on the distance, we kind of want to define a little bit more of our like horizon. And then again, perhaps like a little bit of a nod towards where something goes that way. Just a little bit over here. Lovely stuff. In fact, that could probably stretch a bit further. We are going to vignette things towards the end anyway, so that's okay for now. Then let's go ahead. In fact, I'm just going to sort of bring in a few lines at a bit of an angle here to kind of show like a bit of a swoop perhaps. Then I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to grab the top of the second column now. We move into our lightest tone, and again on top, brush size is still set to about 14%. You could go 7 if you wanted to. It's a lot more of a thin brush head, and you can be far more precise with your application. And we can just start to lighten up. In fact, we can go up to a bit bigger. I'm going to go up to 12, just on top, patching in this like what is a field ultimately though. So you can have like a little wiggle here and there if you want to sort of define some real unevenness to the ground. There we go. So that's got some nice patchiness in there. In the distance, it needs to kind of collapse though, like it needs to kind of all the detail kind of fold together. So you can add like a bit more of it a little bit further back like there. But then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go back to the original sort of shadow-ish tone, which is actually going to be the bottom left of the palette here. And then we're going to use this color now to just like add in some shadows here and there where we feel is like necessary to break up our land. So we can get like a little bit darker over here, around towards our like tree, a little bit darker maybe over there. But you can use this now, as I said, if you go up to like a 20% maybe real close, you can get a lot darker down here. But you can also just break up any of those sort of lighter tones. I'm going to go 13, just jump in between sizes. I want to just make sure that like that light perhaps doesn't stretch too far around the right hand side there. That looks better. And then maybe like some like just shadowy patches in the ground to show its unevenness. Sometimes it's really easy to then keep loading in highlight, and if you keep loading in highlight, it's just going to look too unrealistic. Not that we're going for hyper realism or anything like that, but it does make a difference. And then I'm using the fact that these bushes here might play a factor into the lighting, and I'm just kind of taking away a little bit on that horizon so that that light is just coming in through that gap. Now we're probably going to lose a little bit of this because we're going to move into like adding in some mist early doors. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors and go to this color here, middle of the third column from the right. You want to go to your brush and you want to go to basics and the Forester brush. It's basically a soft air brush. Keep your size nice and small, like a 4% perhaps. Where your horizon is, we can still just about see that on that guide. We want to add some mist. Now, where we've created a new layer, we're actually needing to potentially rearrange a few things at this stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our house. We're going to move it up and under our foreground up here. And then that new layer we just created will sit underneath our house. So it's foreground, house, and then this new empty layer. That way we can draw on the background, but not in front of our house. We are going to be behind the house. And that's quite important because I want to bring some like mist in from behind here. Basically like drawing like a horizontal line a few times just to get a really low hanging bit of mist in there. And then I'm going to set the brush size a bit bigger, maybe like a 6%. And I want to really introduce it, let it blend up the whole scene, just really fade it out. And then you can also like mist out the ground down here as well, make it super cold. Look at that, look at the difference that makes immediately. And we'll also go ahead and add in like a little wiggle of it behind, about 5% in behind the house. Probably need to go a little bit higher and probably add in a little bit more, like, because I want it to blend out some of these kind of woodland like shapes here to a degree. And then bring that mist across just a tiny bit. Don't go too low with it. You can add in like a few strokes across, that's fine. And then while you are doing this, you can also zoom in. You can just about see your chimney in here. If you set your brush size to like a 2%, you can just add in like a little initial bit of steam and smoke from the top of the chimney. And then you can just wiggle your pen and then drift that off like up and over to the right hand side, and then add in like another stream of it. And then maybe even like a 2%. Get in there and just patch in like random little wiggles of slightly brighter bits of smoke and steam, etc. But you can make it fairly strong coming from the top of the house there. Just a little something like that will do the trick. You don't need to do too much. Now we're going to reconnect our house back to the ground. So we're going to go in front of the house and create a new layer. We want to go to our colors and we want to go ahead and grab the bottom of the second column. Brush wants to be set back, so we can go back up to the top in recents now because we've pretty much used every single brush that we are going to use already, and we want the Baceno brush. I'm going to go down to a 7% brush size, and in front of here where we've got that wiggly line, I want to just reconnect it back in towards the ground. So I'm going to add in like some basic like growth almost. I'm going to turn off my guide, I don't really need it on. In fact, I will turn it back on because I just need to see that corner. There we go. I can see the corner of the building. And then you can just go up and down like wiggly line just to get a few like little patches of something just growing very close to the house like that, like a little bit of, that could be a bit of grass, could be anything. And then you can make your brush size a bit smaller if you need to. I'm just going to kind of just bring it in and allow this kind of shadowy tone just to kind of drift over here. But where it's right up against the house, it's going to be quite dark, and then we're going to layer in the shadow, the highlights in a minute on top. So I'm just trying to kind of create like this kind of greeny grayish line here just to connect it into the ground, and then below that just a few little sort of streaks of equal kind of darker tone just to kind of again connect it all together. And it should now start to sit among the ground rather than too much like on top. And you can kind of just trickle in a little bit along the edge of the land if you wish, like along that little horizon over there. Lovely. And then maybe like a little bit further back up there. In fact, we'll undo that. I like the unevenness of it. That looks quite nice. Now what that does tell me though is if I go back down to my mist layer, and that is the one there in the background, and I go to my colors and grab again the middle of the third column from the right. Your brush wants to go back to the basic option of Forester. It tells me I just need to add in like with like a 3% brush size, just maybe a little bit more just down here, just kind of just fading it all kind of together a bit more. I do want that to have that real misty look to it. So I'd rather do less and then realize I need to add some more later on. That's always what I typically try to do. Let's then also, while we're sort of adding some mist, let's go ahead and go in front of the house. And we can go to the layer that we were just working on, to be fair, the little bit of darkness there. And you can just add in very, very light amount of kind of mist just around like the right-hand side of the house, over here in like the shadows, almost just like a little wiggle of it, just to kind of blend it in towards like this, the back area of the scene. Super, super gentle. Don't add in too much there. Try and keep it to a minimum, honestly. But just like a little bit more at the back, perhaps, just so we can connect it in with like a big cluster of it. There we go. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create some house details. So if we tap on the house and create a new layer, I'm going to go to my colors and grab the bottom of the fourth column from the right. Brush wants to go back to Elphinstone again. And we're going to zoom in, and there's two windows, and they're slightly off-centered as well on purpose, just so everything doesn't look too sort of boring and symmetrical, to be honest with you. So we'll draw in our basic rectangle shape. I want to use the brush. I don't want to use like the selection tool because I want to have uneven sort of shaping to it, a little bit quirky almost. It's a wood cabin. It's not been made, 100% perfect, and I love that. We're going to come across here, across our little window. We're going to go down, and then we're just going to fill that in. Lovely stuff. So we've got our little windows. We can then also go ahead and add in on another new layer. Go to your colors and grab the top of the third column from the right. We can add in the bars. There are some bars on the guide. You may just need to turn it up a little bit, but you just want to add in the bars running across the windows. Lovely stuff. And then that one too. A little bit slightly off to the right over here, and run that through. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and start showing how this lighting is going to affect the ground. So let's go ahead and add those colors in. Now we want to be where we are right now. We want to be in front of this layer here, that dark tone around the base of the tree. We do have quite a few layers working with, but I'll try and spare you some as we go. Let's create a new layer. Let's go to our colors and grab the first tone, which is actually going to be the top of the fourth column. You can see we're going to get into some bright colors now. So we're going to go Recent and Piceno. We're going to set that size to about 13%, I think, just to start with. We want to show, first of all, like a few little sort of streaks. Definitely not 13. I'm going to go to 7. It's too brave, too quickly for me. So as that light comes down and hits the ground, there's a little bit of a shadowy spot as we've already made. And then here is where you want to kind of just push up a little bit, just a tiny, tiny bit, to kind of show some vegetation almost around kind of the base of this cabin. And then behind that, you can then smudge that out. Again, we're still using the Piceno to create like areas of brightness. There we go. So by just tufting it up a little bit, you end up showing that there's like a grass there almost. Then you can go ahead and just create like land and then the light landing on it. We can go up to 11% now because we're a little bit further back. And then I imagine that as that light comes across and trickles onto the land, over here is where like we end up with like a slightly raised area of bank, or maybe even grass just in general. And then we can just wiggle our pen around about here, and then again just create like a bank of land a little bit further back over here on that left hand side. Let that kind of trickle around. Keep them separate though, because then you've got like distance. You've created like the light's just trickling enough all the way back here in our scene to identify like a few areas of detail back there. Now you can go even smaller with your brush size if you want to just really define these kind of areas over here. Don't do too much detail. It is a little bit further back at the end of the day. But yeah, just a few little sort of additional push-ups here and there throughout the whole of your little your little area there that's closer to the house is what I'm trying to say. Will look really lovely. So then we're going to go a bit brighter, but we are going to put it on a separate layer. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle of the fourth column and then just repeat. So you're looking at where you've already added in your work. You can then brighten up with a few more little taps and scrapes. Don't try and fill the whole thing. We have a yellow that's going to sit in a minute underneath this layer. So I'm just brightening this up now. And then in this kind of closer foreground area here, I want to just layer in some bright yellow on top. I've got the 7% brush size still. It's brightening up the land, showing it's a little bit more yellow as it's really like in that lighting. And of course, as that light trickles away, you're probably going to lose it a little bit, but we can add this color a tiny bit over here. So just like a few bits of like variation in color. My pressure right now is so light, and it's only really going to sit on the edges. The orange can sit like as the majority color here. So that's nice and subtle. You get a little bit of color coming across. In my pre-practices, I did add like a little bit more land here. So I will just add in like the lightest amount of yellow, just blending away into the distance, landing on a few little tufts of something. And then, as I said, we'll tap on the layer below our first orange color and create a new layer. So if we go to our colors now and grab the yellow, this yellow is going to sit underneath the kind of orangey red tone and then the orange tone we added before, meaning because it's underneath, I can light it from the opposite side. So if I go down to like a 3% brush size, I can literally just draw in like little sort of tufts of real bright yellow where the light from the window is catching on like the edge of a bush or something like that, you know, right on the edge. So as it comes across, it lands, hits that area there, and then I can go back to 7% for like the land, and I can brighten that up as well, showing how much light is coming across. Of course, these things may cast shadows, and we're going to kind of reflect that in a minute. But yes, I want to make sure that this area here is a little bit more yellowy, a little bit brighter, of course. And you can add in, again, a few little sort of dabbles of this underneath your orange way over here. But again, keep it super subtle. Don't add in too much, honestly. Now, as I said, those things may cast shadows. So when you're happy and you've got a good sort of blanket of your little color, you can go ahead and pinch those 3 layers together. But you can also then hold down on your eraser, which then switches your brush to the Paceno. And then you can just maybe get in behind, you know, some of these like foreground areas and maybe create some shadows. Now, you probably want to be a bit smaller, like a 2% maybe, and just like add in some shadow and then like a bit of a shadow running off the back of it as well. So really lightly, you can just erase and create like a drag of shadow coming off of those foreground little tufts. You know, maybe just a little bit of extra shadow, even though they're really close and they are being lit the most, they would, you know, still cast shadows, which is still very fun to introduce. And then because you're erasing, you can also just randomly like flick the brush up and down like I'm doing now to create grassy tufts, but they're like not being lit somehow or for some reason. And it just adds in a little bit more sort of context and detail to it. Likewise, we'll also go ahead and just maybe sort of do the same over here with like a 7 or 6%, just in behind some of your grasses over here. You know, just break them up, get rid of that kind of blanket look to it, and just kind of blend them back into the scene. There we go. Lovely. Next step then is to brighten up those windows. Let's go ahead and we'll create a new layer. We'll change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. And then we're going to go ahead and go to our colors and go back to the bottom of the 4th column from the right. Your brush wants to be set back to the Forester brush. And brush size is going to be very small, like a 1, maybe 2%, because we just want to get inside these windows. So that's potentially too big. I need a smaller 2%. There we go. I can brighten them up on more so towards that left-hand edge and really brighten up these windows over here. This is the side of the house that's been lit the most. Let that color just bleed over. That's perfectly fine. Maybe in this window, we just kind of brighten up the left-hand corner maybe, and a dabble of extra color over there perhaps, to show that the light is coming from like that side of the building. And then as a result, you can grab your brush size to like a 4% maybe a tad bigger, 4-5%. And you want to just give us a little bit of a streak. There we go. You'll slowly start to see like a bit of a beam of color coming across out the window. There we go. Lovely little bit of glow. However, we are going to emphasize that a little bit more by tapping on the layer below and creating another new layer. And then we're going to just, with our color set to the same color, but the layer set to normal, you can just sort of really create like a bit of an orangey glow almost coming from the window, and then push that orangey glow like a little bit higher, a little bit lower as well, a bit further as well, and outwards, to kind of show how it's really lighting up this little field outside the property. And we're not going to do anything on the right hand side, maybe like the tiniest little bit of orange around the window. I don't want to add in too much, but look at the difference. If I move it off to the left and turn it on and off, you see how much the beam travels quite far, and it's very subtle still, but you end up with that lovely beam of color making its way across the whole property. And you can go back to your add layer then as a result, and maybe you say, well, okay, I can probably punch out the light a little bit closer towards the property again, just to really emphasize it. Let's then very quickly, in comparison to like previous tutorials, add in some color around the building. So we're simply going to go ahead and tap on a new layer above our property, tap on the layer and clipping mask it. While you're here, you can pinch your window frames together if you wish to the window and the orange, that's fine. And then we're going to go back down to our clip layer. We're going to go to our colors, and we're going to grab the top of the fourth column from the right. Brush wants to be set to Picerno. Size is probably around about that 7% marker. We'll see how that lands. You can see I've sort of isolated a few details. Now that is definitely too big. Let's go down to 3. We're going to draw in a line across here. So that's like the main column as such. You can just about see it underneath the guide. There's then also another line here as well. That's going to go all the way towards the edge. And then in that gap, you can then start to draw in more horizontal beams for logs, you know, like the wood of the property. And the logs don't have to be like, you don't have to go all the way to the edge. You don't have to do anything like that. As long as you somewhat keep them kind of running across from one another, that's perfectly fine. I mean, you are technically underneath in your layers of your window, so you can just run those lines all the way through. And then in this top portion up here, I did initially put another window, but I'm actually not going to do that. I just want to go ahead and just draw in like a big, sort of quite bright line here to separate the two floors almost. And then in the top section, I just want to draw in lines. Now you'll see that there's a vertical line here, and that's important because that then separates the roof overhang. So you do that line up to here, and then you just want to draw in some vertical lines, pretty parallel kind of gaps to them. Don't go all the way up underneath the point there of the property. You can just let it kind of just fall off as it gets towards like what will ultimately a bit of a darker overhang. Then you've got this underhang, or the underside even. So you can go ahead and just draw that in fairly firm with your color. You know, I'm adding in like a couple of layers worth of color on there. And then here you can just draw like a few lines here going backwards, like that's the overhang of the roof in there. So you start to separate those spaces. I'm going to go ahead and draw in another line down here as well, following that part of the guide. And then likewise, I'll do the same at the top up here as well, down, following that part of the guide again. Likewise, the very edge of the roof over here, still getting lit from the other side, isn't it? So if I brighten this up as much as I can, it's being lit from whatever's coming across, just to isolate all these kind of frames from one another. Let's then draw in this like roof edge here, all the way down. Lovely stuff. And while we're doing horizontal lines, we can also go ahead and sort of draw in like one horizontal line and then some more all the way through the property. You don't need to sort of press consistently or anything like that. Let the overhang shadow of the property above, like the roof, separate it. That's all you need to do, just to sort of bring out the wood. Likewise here, I just want to make this a little bit more prominent, and then likewise I also want to go down this edge as well, like, to show like the vertical lines, which I've not yet identified on this side either, just to kind of bring them out. And then your roof, all I want you to do is just set your brush size to like a 7% now, and just draw in like parallel lines again all the way kind of across. They don't have to be consistent weights or anything like that. As long as they're just like all following the right kind of angle, you're all good. Something a little bit like this, just to show again all that kind of roof coloring. And then on the very top edge, you kind of just want to wiggle your pen along that line just to kind of brighten it up a little bit more. So try and avoid your chimney if you can, so go a little bit horizontal and then wiggle your pen down there, wiggle it down all the way across, just trying to brighten up the very top edge and let that color just fall off as it gets further down. You do have your chimney, and the only thing you need to do, like a 3% honestly, is just draw in like a few like little sort of stamp shapes here on this left hand side, and then the right hand side you can do a few stamps of this kind of brush at like a small size, which is set to 3%, and that's just enough to kind of show almost like brick-like detail. Very simple. And if you go up to the very top and turn off your guide for a second, you should pretty much be left with exactly what the guide looked like to a degree. Now what we want to then do is go to our colors and grab the color here, bottom of the fourth column from the right, small brush size of like 3%, and now start highlighting based off of the lighting. So that window, I imagine that this is like an overhang of wood, so it's going to like brighten that up a little bit. It's going to brighten up a few of the logs maybe over here on the edge of the building, you know, just beside the window. Definitely this like little lower, thicker piece of wood down here. Lovely stuff. Just isolating a few areas, not too many and not too consistent, but just a little bit like this. Definitely a little bit on here too. Again, just want to show how that wood is landing on everything. And then up here, we're going to add in like a bit on the overhang of the roof, like that light is just casting. And then it's also going to brighten up a few little bits under here. Very, very light with your pressure if possible. Shows that, boom, that light going up and under the roof line, which I think looks really fun. And then you can get like a very, very small little trickle of light just underneath there too. Lovely. And I think that's actually it. I don't think you need to necessarily add in much more than that, bar, of course, if you're going to follow that rule, you probably need like a little bit of lighting on this side as well. And then maybe just like a trickle of it on some of the edges. I want this side to be a lot darker in comparison, but it should just start to brighten everything up. So I'm going to zoom in for you so you can get the option to pause if you need to, just to kind of really take that kind of lighting angle and try and, you know, follow suit basically. I might just add in a little bit there too. And then I'm going to go to my colors and grab a slightly lighter tone. Let's grab the middle of the second column. And then we're going to kind of reflect the light coming from the sky above. So brightening up this edge over here. I'm then going to go ahead and just brighten up the very top end of the roof. A little bit of like a few stamps of, as I said, like stamps is basically like a tap and a push almost, just to try and add in like a repeating kind of texture on that side. And then maybe a little bit on the rear. And then what I might do is just set my brush size to like a 7% and give it a little wiggle of light tone just coming down the roof. But of course, trying to give ourselves a little shadow where our chimney is also blocking that. So now you've done that, you have done pretty much the whole background scene. You now just want to work on the foreground. So if you are looking to save layers, feel free to pinch that layer we were just working on to your actual tree shape if you want. Your background, you can pinch these two layers together. It's not that many layers, but we're going to get into some more at the foreground up here. So we're going to create a new layer in front of this big block of color and keep our guide turned off. We're going to go to our colors and go top left of the palette. Your brush wants to be set to the Elphinstone, 32% on the brush size. Just like before, we're going to run in some really long grasses, like a little something like this, and then just flicking them up, different pressures, different angles, different curls and flicks, and honestly, go crazy. And if you've done any of my recent tutorials, as I said, you'll be familiar with this kind of exercise. Just honestly, just creating just wild grass over here on the sort of edge line of the property maybe. And then you kind of want to, I've learned kind of to maybe say, right, well, let's maybe say that this side over here kind of leans in a slightly different manner. You know, it just kind of comes across at like different angles maybe. And then maybe some larger ones kind of curling off the edge of our scene. So it creates some variation between the two edges over here. And make sure you kind of get in there a little bit behind and like trying to look for that Biceno kind of outline and say, right, I'm going to break that up. But you can also create big dark lines down here because, you know, they fly in from the very bottom of our scene, because this is like a 3D object at the end of the day. These grasses are all going to come in right from the very bottom of the scene and then all the way like so. And someone commented on my recent tutorials, and a friend of the channel, to be fair, Kevin, and he mentioned, of course, that you can create things larger a lot of the time and then shrink them down, which is the best thing to do because then you get more detail, rather than, of course, scale things up, which is absolutely correct in Procreate. But it's worth noting that, like, if you want to create like these kind of seeded, kind of almost like wheat-like looking shapes here, like I'm creating right now, you can make them much, much bigger, like I'm doing right now, and then we can just scale them down in a second and use exactly what he said as a measure of like making more detail perhaps. So yes, that is 100% great advice, although sometimes you don't want to do too much when you're making things nice and big, because when you shrink that down, that level of detail is going to be quite intense now. So once you've done one of these, grab your cursor, use uniform, scale it down in size. Keep this one a little bit larger than the others. So let's maybe go like here with a slightly larger one, and then swipe back to the left and duplicate. Grab your cursor, maybe make it a little bit smaller, and then I'll start just literally copy pasting it basically all over your scene. Maybe have one like, I'm going to have one right on the edge of the scene there too. And then you can flip it horizontal as well, so it doesn't have to match that same curve as we just done a second ago. It can flick up at a different angle, which will look fantastic. You know, just duplicate your work. As long as you keep one big one up there and you can you know, reuse that one, it will look fantastic. So bring a few of those in across the scene, and again, try also not to destroy your sort of main focal point. Like, don't add in too many of these in the way. You'll notice I've kind of kept like what is like an imaginary border around here to try and prevent myself from doing that. And then we're going to layer in more color. So keep hold of your bottom one here because that's the original. Pinch the other ones above onto one layer and then create another new layer. Go to your colors and grab the middle of the first column. And Elphinstone still, we're now going to move into like a slightly grey tone. You can see slight variation in the colors here. So in here, lots more variation in the colors. You can somewhat focus this a little bit higher, like as in towards the edge of these like areas of grasses. That's fine. You can even like run it literally up and down the edge of one of your like big blades up there. That's fine. It's just trying to get it to kind of layer on top correctly is important if you're going to do that. And just basically adding in variety of color tones in here. A few more flicks from here. Don't need to scatter it in everywhere and consistently everywhere either. Like, I can have it anywhere I want, but it doesn't need to be everywhere. Lovely. Maybe a little bit lower down, just to add in some variety. And then while we're adding in some detail, let's then also go ahead and go back down to our original grasses. Let's go to our colors and grab the top left of the palette. And now we're just going to go with a few sort of taps, some 32% to create like leaves or like plants or anything you can think of, honestly, to describe this little area down here. You can run up some of your grasses like so to create, like, yeah, again, just wildlife, basically. Like, this is just part of my aesthetic at the minute. I'm really enjoying. You seem to also really enjoy it in terms of the tutorials, but this is just my vibe at the minute and I'm really enjoying it. So you should always try and stick with something for a little while it's so enjoyable. Learn to not master it. It's never necessarily about mastering it, but, you know, really learn it and understand it and learn where you can make tweaks as you go. Now, we're then going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new layer and drag it up and above and under our guide. I'm going to go to my brush and go to the Forester brush and set the size to probably around about sort of 17% and just add in a bit of a gradient down here. I just want to darken up into those corners a little bit, creating that nice dark tone to it. Lovely. Then we're going to go ahead and add some color to this area, but on the opposite side of our grasses so far. So what we have to do is we have to go down here. So we're underneath this big dark layer and create a new layer. Go to your colors and then we're going to work these two in. So we're going to grab top of the third column, brush is the Elphinstone again, and then on the opposite side over here, you're going to add in some orangey grasses that are getting picked up by super light amount of sort of color coming all the way from the distant area down there. Now again, you can run this up the edge, but you got to be super, super close, like, and off to that right-hand side as much as possible. And then I'm going to undo that because I just didn't do it correctly. Like, I want to add in like a little speckle of orange on that side. Likewise, I also want to add in some like light catching on the edge by just a few repeating dashes to basically the same style. I add in a bit of orange there as if it's getting lit from the opposite side there. Again, underneath some of your little dashes now that you added in for your little your wildlife and growth, you can add in some additional little dots of detail. Don't add in too much, and definitely like try to focus the sort of color towards that left hand side, maybe a few little blades over here, just getting a little bit of color, but definitely nothing over here other than this guy seems to want to drift over there. So we'll just add a bit of orange on top like so. Then you can go ahead and really sort of take that to the next level by adding in some of like the yellowy tones, which is the middle of the third column, and repeat. So you go up some of them, find areas that you want to like detail in a bit more. And again, on the edge of your seeds, you're just like adding in where that light maybe catches the most. But don't do too much, keep it subtle, you know, don't overdo it. Just a little bit of variation in our little foreground area here. Let's maybe try and catch that with a little bit of yellow. There we go, that looks quite nice. And then it wouldn't be a Joel Create tutorial without an add layer right at the very top, would it? So let's go right to the top of our layers and create a new layer. Change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. We're going to go back to our colors and we're going to grab the bottom of the fourth column from the right. We're going to go back to our brush. Let's go back to Forester. Set that brush size to probably around about 15%. I want to brighten up this area over here. I want to give it like a nice glow. So I'm going to tap a few times. That's always the best case. Then about 10%. Just kind of punch out the window a little bit and kind of blanket in like a bit more of a brighter glow down and onto the ground down here. Turn your layer on and off. Just see what the damage is you've done. You know, I do really like that. It looks really nice and soft and sort of gets attacked a little bit by the mist in the air. On this add layer as well, you can then go to your Elphinstone brush and you could maybe add in like a few details in the foreground. So again, some of those little seedlings, maybe just on the edge over here. You are on top of everything, so you can't go too wild with it. And maybe just the tiniest little sort of outline to some edges here, just to kind of, boom, there we go, show all that light just coming across onto the edge. A couple of little specks over there. I've drawn in a line by accident there. And then maybe just like, whoa, try and find like a few areas that you could maybe do not do very much of this, honestly, in this foreground. It's meant to be super subtle and that light is just coming across. While we're here, let's go back to the Pacino brush and probably like a 3% brush size, honestly, because we could get underneath our roof line there, brightening that up. Just blending it out though as it goes upwards. Love that. That's just going to emphasize that lighting just a little bit more. A little bit there too. Maybe a little bit along the bottom edge here. Maybe a tad under there. You know, you can go even smaller. You can go down to like a 1 or 2% if you want to get really granular with it. And just like streak that in. Again, as I said to you before, you can then at the foreground here, a couple more little dashes and flicks to identify like the brightest edges of the area that we think is getting the most amount of light. And if you want to, maybe 3%, just a little bit of extra color. Little bit of extra color. Keeping it super, super gentle. I don't want to do too much. I want to keep it somewhat towards a subtle kind of degree. Turn it on and off. Again, look at the damage you've done, but also look at how good it looks now as well. So let's just go ahead and add in some further kind of refinement, and it's literally just vignettes. Underneath your foreground here, if I turn it on and off, you've got the color layer on the opposite end, and then you want to tap below that and create a new layer. Go to your colors and go top left of the palette. Brush. Let's go to Forester brush again, and then set the size to about 20%. Just over here, just darken up the edgy scene. Don't do too much, but just darken it up on the right. You know, just kind of blending that out a little bit more in our scene, a little bit up towards the right hand side, and then maybe just like a little bit of extra darkness. Blending in our little bit of foreground area to the land, perhaps, just tying it a little bit closer together. And then your background area. If you're not someone who likes this kind of painterly look, you don't have to keep hold of it. You know, you can pinch your background together onto one layer, And then you could go up to your adjustments and go to like Gauge and Blur, and you could go left to right and just add in like a subtle 4 or even 3% Gauge and Blur there. It's totally up to you. However, there's a really cool effect you can do. If I undo that, I duplicate my background. The top one, if I change the blend mode from normal to the option of lighten, and then I go to my adjustments and I go to Gauge and Blur and I swipe from left to right, I'll get this kind of very soft looking effect. So if I go up to 9% there with the Gauge and Blur, so I swipe left to right, 9%, and if I turn that layer on and off, just look, it gets that kind of soft, glowy-ish aesthetic. And that is an effect I've used many times, and effect I really actually love to do, especially when you've got a background that's quite sort of minimalistic in a sense. Now, one thing you can do is if you swipe from left to right on both layers and select them, you may also want to change your background. Maybe, you may want to move it across and scale it up in size just to see if you get a slightly better fit with the background elements. I, for example, want to get rid of a little bit of that left-hand side. So I'm going to scale up my right-hand side here just to see if I can find a sort of position that kind of fits a little bit better, which I think that one does for me. So I'm then going to go ahead and pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and we end up with today's finished design. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them, and come join my Patreon, because that's where I post 3 more exclusive tutorials that are not available on YouTube. They're only available on Patreon, and there is a catalogue now of over 160 exclusive tutorials. And again, with 3 added every single month, that collection just continues to grow. Again, there's a link to that in the description down below. And if you enjoyed this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.